Hello and welcome back to Guzzoline Garage. Today's video is one I'm quite excited about because Paramount Performance have sent me this, which, as you might remember in the last video, we were left off with a slightly disappointing note of this pipe not fitting onto here. But as you can see, this new one does a lot better. But not only that, we might also even get round to fitting this coolant crossover between the rear cylinder heads and this, the supercharger and intake manifold assembly. And then to top it all off, we might even get round to fitting this, the charge cooler, and one of these, an upper Ypipe, infamous. So stick around because we've got all that to come, and I've waited a very long time to get to this point. I might not show you the fitment of the air intake because it's pretty simple. You saw most of it in the last video. This is just kind of finishing it off. Depends how much space I've got in this video. If you see it now, it's because the rest of it took less time than I thought. The next job then will be fitting the rear coolant crossover. So a couple of points to note here is that these O-rings were stuck to the block on my car, so I've just had to go and retrieve those. So make sure you get them out and don't double gasket it or double O-ring it, because then it definitely will leak. And I've also swapped over these little, I think it's like a little wax stat thing for the heater, I think, because this got a bit of a bump in transit. There was a hole in the box and I didn't like the way that the plug had been deformed, so I've swapped over and I've got my old original one in here. I'm also going to check the torque on these screws because it obviously came assembled. I didn't make that, and if it does leak once it's fitted, it's really hard to access. So I'm glad I did check the torque on these Phillips screws because I got about half a turn on some of those, so they weren't all quite tight. So that's worth doing. Torque for the 4 little bolts that are going to hold it in. These are T30 size, I think, and they're going to go to 12 Newton meters. That's not out of the manual, that's just kind of guesstimated based on similar torque settings for similar size screws that I've seen so far on the engine. And there's only a few things to think about. There's 2 bolts, a pipe and a plug, and just on the back there's a hole here and here, which hold little clips for parts of the wiring loom. And that's that. Let's get her on. So all I've really been doing is working backwards through the list of things that I took off. And next we've got the intakes to the heads, which means that we're going to be finally putting that back on the engine. So there's a couple of things to think about and a certain way of doing it really. So we've got a left hand and a right hand intake gasket. These are the part numbers if you need them. That's for your left hand, and for your right hand you got that one. And inside they look like this. And then the Jaguar manual calls for some special tools to be used. So the idea is you lay that down on the cylinder head and then insert a special tool like that and a friend of it over here somewhere. Now all these are normal M8 bolts with the heads cut off, and then I've just filed a slight chamfer on so that I can get it lined up easier. So make yourself some of those up, that'll make your life a lot easier. And we're also going to use some of this. This is Wellseal. It's pretty old school. People use it for like cylinder head gaskets most of the time. Really, I guess this would be a dry fit gasket because it's a multi-layer steel thing, or like a single layer steel pressed thing. But because we've got quite a bit of corrosion on the cylinder head and a little bit of corrosion on the underside of the intake manifolds, that will just help us out, I think, and get a decent seal. I think it's better to have that and not really need it than to not have it and to need it. Something else that I took off the car a long time ago are these two little fellas. It's important that we remember these. So what they do is they clip onto the underside of the supercharger, just here and here. And what they're for is holding this little guy, the line that goes from the throttle body all the way through the V of the engine and to the heater pipe that we've just fitted. So they need to be fitted to hold that and keep it steady. And finally, don't forget about these little fellas. These were reasonably corroded up, if you remember, so we're going to copper grease those, ready for the next poor sod that has to do this, probably me. So really that's 4 factors to think about: copper greasing the dowel pins, fitting the hose clips, fitting the new intake gaskets with Wellseal to make up for the corrosion, and using the alignment pins so that all the gaskets stay aligned. And then once that's down, we can put the normal bolts in and whip the alignment bolts out. So what are we waiting for? Let's get on with it. So that's the supercharger in place sort of loosely. At the moment it's 5 to 10 mil still proud of the intakes, and that I think is because the dowel pins haven't engaged with their recesses in the block. Because they were such a tight fit, crowbarring them off, I think when we start to actually torque down the intake manifolds, that's when those dowel pins should sort of slide home and we'll get the cylinder head, the intake manifolds bolted down to the cylinder heads properly. What took a bit of time there was making sure that absolutely everything was out of the way. So the throttle body coolant pipe is obviously one of the main concerns, but the intake manifolds sit really close to the cam covers and I forgot just how close it was. So I actually trapped one of these little clips down the side, which was annoying. And then I was just making sure at the back end as well that the bracketry from the Symposer was all free and I hadn't accidentally pinched or trapped any wiring or vacuum connections down that end either before we go ahead and torque all this down. So I'm going to put a couple of the intake manifold bolts in, take the guide pins out, replace those, and I will look up the torque spec and get back to you in just a moment. I think it's 25 Newton meters, but it could be a bit more. So I really struggled again to find the proper data on these. I obviously haven't got a proper workshop manual for this car, but as far as I can work out, torque for these is 25 Newton meters, which to me seems suspiciously low, but they are only an 8 size and they're going into aluminium, so that's what I'll go with. So that's the supercharger down and torqued. You may notice I did a kind of diagonal pattern on that. It's just something I sort of made up. Normally to seat something that's a big unit like that, you'd try and get it down gently. So yeah, that's that. I think the next thing I'll be putting the charge cooler on top of all that. Okay, so I've been having a bit of a poke around and I've been reading through my notebook, working backwards. These are all the lower Ypipe bits and bobs that we did while the supercharger was off, with the aux belt and thermostat parts. This is the supercharger rebuild, and we've just fitted these intakes back onto the heads, so I can cross that off. Next thing is to fit the fuel rail, but I'm not going to do that because that gets in the way, and that's just a note to tell me that I removed it. What I can do is fit this vacuum line and electrical plug that are on the passenger intake manifold at the back over there. So I'm going to go do that now because that'll be a lot easier without the charge cooler back in the way. So I'm a little confused about the vac line. While it feels like it could go on there, I'm not 100% sure it's the right one, so I'm going to keep an eye on that as we continue reassembling. So the next steps are all ancillary bits and bobs that bolt on. And one thing I do not want to do is fumble and drop a bolt into either of the inlet ports. I could just rag them up again with socks and what have you. But I think the best thing to do is to fit the charge cooler on top, even if we only do it loosely for now, while we continue building around it. Hopefully it'll go in once and stay in, and we won't have to redo it, but you know, if we have to take it off again, it's no big deal, I suppose. So I'm going to reuse the alignment pins that we had for the air intakes, for the manifolds, put some alignment pins in. I am going to reuse the old gasket because they're expensive, they're £100. And I'm going to use Wellseal on it as well. So I cleaned it off with brake cleaner, got it free of any oil, dirt, debris and grime. I'll lather everything in Wellseal, put the alignment pins in, put the gasket in and drop the charge cooler on top. Let's do that. That'll do for now, Chief. The Wellseal sealant doesn't set or go off, if you like, really. It sort of remains tacky. So that's just plonked in. It's not going to wander anywhere. And I can have a look at putting everything else on. And if I can get everything else on around it, great. Then I can button that up and torque it all up. But yeah, that's the main thing, is that those ports are covered and nothing's going to drop into the engine after we've done all this work. Cool. So I'm still going to leave this loose for now because I've just got a nasty feeling there might be a little surprise where I've got to lift it off in order to refit something else around the edges. But I'm going to keep building up around it, and hopefully we'll get to the point where the last thing to do is put the bolts in this, I think. So, I mean, looking at my little list that I've got down here, there's a couple of cable ties that I snipped out of the tray at the back there, so let's put those back in. Now see, this is the bit I was worried about, because one of the main reasons I was even here in the first place is to replace this, which is sort of one of the last pieces of the puzzle, the upper Ypipe, and it sits roughly there. Connects onto this hose here, another hose down here, and it should slot into the top of the engine there. But it looks like it might not be possible to refit it with the charge cooler and the supercharger in place. So I might be about to take off the supercharger again, which is going to really hurt my feelings if I have to do that. So I'm going to try and wiggle it around and try and get it into place, because I seem to remember I took it off without removing that. But I might be wrong, so let's find out. Well, you can colour me relieved that that fitted. It was a bloody tight fit, mind, and I think you can get away with fitting that well before you put the supercharger, sorry, before you put the charge cooler on, but it obviously has to go above the supercharger, so yeah, I'm talking rubbish. That is absolutely the way that goes on. You have to have the supercharger in, and the charge cooler really doesn't make any difference because it goes over the snout, so yeah, it's got to be that way around. It's just a tight fit, bit of a wiggle there to get that in. On the O-ring, you probably saw I put some WD-40 on there, which helped quite a lot. Now to make sure that these hoses are all nicely snug, get that one on as well. And then there is a difference between this pipe and the old pipe with the mounting bolts. I'll show you that in a bit. So carrying on with our Ypipe refit, these are the bolts that originally came out of the plastic Ypipe. And what we can tell, or what we can notice, is that this plastic ridge is much thicker than the aluminium one here. So we need to trim down the bolt that goes in the front here, because this is a blind hole, so the bolt will likely bottom out and potentially crack the snout of the supercharger. So the difference, I would say, is probably something like 15 millimeters. So we're going to trim 15 millimeters off one of these bolts for that front end. And I've just cut one down and I've just tickled the end with a file so that it'll thread in nicely. So that can go in my front bolt hole. That's for my rear. And these are going to get torqued to 12 Newton meters, as are a lot of the small M6T30 fasteners. The part number, by the way, should you need it, for that top Ypipe is just there. Next up, I'm going to fit this little bracket, which was part of the Symposer assembly. It now seems pointless, but it does have this little clip on, which helps keep this vacuum line safe. So I'm going to retain it just for that reason. It mounts with two 30mm T30 screws, one either side, and torque will be 12 Newton meters again. Carrying on with the Symposer theme, the bracket that's at the back, which did have the Symposer fitted to it, I've got a little bag of bolts here for it, and you might remember there were these nightmarish little 10mm long T30s. That's what I'm going to fit next. But I'm probably going to leave the bottom one out because it's a real pain and there's no Symposer there anymore. So just the top two I think I'll get away with. The two at the back I've just done, just mounted the cable tray at the back on. They were 20mm long. Because they go onto plastic, I've not used a torque setting, I've just done them up sensibly tight without breaking the plastic. Next thing I'm going to have a look at then, before I put the throttle body and stuff in the way, I'm going to try and put the drive belt on for the supercharger. I tried doing the belt from memory and that obviously didn't work out for me because I'm an idiot. So goes around the crank, fair enough, wraps right around the idler, gets maximum wrap on the supercharger, but then it needs to go up and over that second idler instead, and then round the tensioner. Now that belt is really suspiciously slack. Like, I could nearly pull that off with my hand if I really wanted to. So I'm not sure what's going on there, or if I've got the right belt or wrong belt or what. But I tell you, I ain't really got any confidence in it. Very interesting. Looking closer at the new Supercharger belt, I definitely think it's not the right size. I've fitted it either way. You might have saw I put it the other side of this idler as well, which would give you a bit more belt wrap on the Supercharger, but it seems to foul the tensioner at that point. There's a few other people on the internet that have said, you know, has anyone else had a fitment issue with the Paramount belt? Because that's currently fitted, and I don't even need my hand to, I don't even need the breaker bar on the tensioner. I can literally just unfit that by hand if I want, which obviously ain't right. So I'm pretty annoyed, I'm not going to lie to you, because this is the third thing from Paramount Performance that doesn't fit in a row. I had some cats that didn't fit, I had an air intake that didn't fit, and now I've got a belt that doesn't fit as well. So I'm going to get in touch with them, find out what the hell's going on, and looks like I might need a 1470 maybe, I would suggest, on the belt number. But it's yeah, again, one of them things, not many other people sell bits for them, so you are massively in a rock and a hard place. We can carry on, we can bolt the throttle body up next, I think, and put the plugs in, and we'll do up all the charge cooler bolts, and then we'll have to wait on a Supercharger belt and getting the air intake in. Very disappointing, but that is just the way the cookie crumbles, man. So, throttle body, we've got a brand new gasket, which is here. There's your part number if you need it. Now, I bought this thinking I'd need it. I don't really need it, because if you look at how that's made, the quality of it is really good, and the old one would definitely be very reusable. So, you know, if you're doing this, I would recommend don't waste your money on that. It's only sort of 10-15 quid, but it's 10 or 15 quid that you can save. Bolts are going to be 10 Newton meters. I might push it up to 12 because 10 just doesn't seem like a lot. And yeah, that's about all I've got to say on that one for now. And then there'll be a few plugs to reconnect and a vacuum line and some other bits and bobs once that's all bolted up. Unfortunately, I messed up and didn't film that, but the gasket goes in. It's got some little locating pegs on it, so it only goes one way. 4 bolts, torque to 12 Newton meters, and then I've clipped in 1, 2, 3, and 4 electrical plugs, 1 vacuum line, a plastic tab that holds the wiring loom, and another plastic tab that holds the wiring loom. That's that. I will try and do better with the camera from now on. So it's a new day, and if you can hear a little bit of background noise on this clip, it's just my neighbours having a barbecue. It's a lovely day for it today. I spoke to Paramount about the belt issue, and they says, yeah, we've sent you the wrong belt. It should be XYZ, whatever kind of belt, and we've sent the wrong one, so waiting on the delivery for that. They did offer to remedy the situation, this being the third thing that's not fitted well out of the box, by offering me some money off should I wish to make another purchase in future, which will come in handy for the software and the remapping on this. Since I've put all of their Go Fast bits on, it makes sense to have their software and map, which is what I suppose I'll end up going for. But I've still got a little bit of thinking to do about that. We left off having fitted the throttle body, torqued it, and done the wiring loom connections. All I've just done is fitted this vacuum line on now. So it'll be the rest of the bolts. There's 4 hex head ones that go in the middle, there's 2 specialist long ones that go at the front end here, and the rest I think are all pretty much the same around the outer edge of the charge cooler. Then finally after that there's the fuel rail to put on top. That goes on last because it gets in the way of some of the bolts. Let's continue. Now as far as tightening torque goes for the charge cooler assembly, I don't have the diagram for the V8 model, I only have the diagram for the V6 model. And that shows it getting tightened diagonally on the 4 bolts in the centre, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, diagonally on the sort of 4 outer central bolts. So that spine, if you like, is tightened centrally and diagonally, and then 9, 10, 11, 12 and so on around the outside edge in a loop. So I'm going to copy that for the V8. I imagine it's exactly the same, if not very similar, and we won't go far wrong with that. And just in case I missed it, the tightening torque is 25 Newton meters. Then we've got the vacuum line to connect here. It's quite a tight fit and I struggled getting it on earlier, so I'm going to give it a little blast of WD again, just around the edge of the O-ring to try and help it click in a little easier. It's still really pulled to that side. It's as if this hose has magically got shorter while the car's been apart. It is all routed correctly down that end, so I don't know what to put that down to, but it's worth watching for vacuum leaks from that area, I would say. Then there's the coolant pipes to connect on the side here. and the fuel rail, which goes in with the 17mm nuts. And we mustn't forget about all of our little brackets, which are going to hold it in place. I don't know how long I have or haven't been recording for. I've gotten really bad at this for some reason, but the fuel line is routed in, which is a little bit difficult. Obviously 17mm nuts either end to nip up, and then it's just a case of getting the little P-clips lined up. There's 4 of them, and to get the fuel line routed back in, I did have to re-disconnect that vacuum line and these coolant lines that I've literally just connected, but whatever, takes a couple of seconds, doesn't it? 12 Newton meters for the torque on these little fuel line clamp bolts, and sensibly tight on the fuel line unions. They do carry very high pressure fuel, so they do need to be leak tight, but at the same time those couplings are designed to seal really well, so you don't need to be going absolutely nuclear, because then you risk stripping the thread and then you're in for a nightmare. So yeah, nip them up, and on first start up just watch them like a hawk for any signs of leakage and nip them off if needed.
Ready, everybody. He's about to do something stupid.
Oh no. Really annoyed with myself. You may have just noticed I've just lost a tool. The bit fell out and it dropped down the back here, and I'm pretty sure it's gone underneath and into like the V of the engine underneath the supercharger. So I'm going to strip it all apart and get it out again. No, I'm not going to do that. I think if the tool's in there, that's just where it lives now. But I am not the kind of guy that normally loses tools. What happened was the little ball bearing that should hold that in has become unseated. See how that should be there? That's what grips the bit. Anyway, I'm going to fish around with a magnet on a stick and try and get it out from down in there, and if I can't, I can't. Hey! That is a turn up for the books. Now very carefully we approach the final bolt. Torque to 12 Newton meters, finished on the mechanicals. It'll be topping it up and going for a first start as soon as the supercharger belt arrives. So I suppose actually I'm not finished on the mechanicals, am I? I may end the video here on this note, and we'll fit that belt and fire up on a different video. If not, we'll carry on going, let's see. So while we're waiting for the supercharger and assembling the rest of this front end, we can at least top up the coolant, and fingers crossed there's no leaks. I have got a pressure testing kit which I might use. Ideally we need to be able to run the engine to circulate the coolant and bleed it properly, but we can at least start topping things up. Type of coolant, Jaguar have obviously got their own spec. By and large, certainly talking very generally in the United Kingdom, there are 2 kinds. Usually blue coolant is ethylene glycol based and tends to be for classic cars and cars with iron components, majority, i.e. iron block and head. Generally when cars went to using aluminium or large parts of aluminium, such as aluminium cylinder heads, aluminium blocks, so on, they went to the pink coolant, which is organic acid technology. It's different to ethylene glycol in how the additives work, and they're safe for use on aluminium. There are other kinds, there are other colours. There's oranges, there's greens, there's yellowy kind of colours. So the colour is not necessarily an indication of what kind it is. You just need to look at what type of coolant it is. Volkswagen have got their own spec, Mercedes, BMW, etc, 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 but by and large they will fit into either the ethylene glycol or the OAT category. That is concentrated, so I'm going to put 2.5 litres in that jug, top up the rest with water, and then start filling the system. So while we still wait for the belt, I had a tidy up at the garage and then I got bored and decided to carry on topping up the coolant and also using this cooling system pressure tester. You can get these really cheaply now. There's a full kit. It comes with like, I don't know, 10 or 15 different sizes of cap to fit different kinds of cars and what have you. The idea is that screws on to the coolant tank or reservoir or radiator or whatever. Then that's like a little hand pump which pressurizes the system up to your sort of normal 1.3, 1.5 kind of bar level. And there's a little valve on here that lets the air out again. Really useful for pressure testing a system and inspecting it for leaks while the engine's off and while the system's cold, which is what I'm sort of half trying to do here. But also it'll force air that down and then round the system, which should sort of bleed back off here at the bleed screw. So I'm going to keep doing that for a little bit and see what happens. And as the system starts to pressurise on this gauge, the level in the header tank goes down and down because it obviously pushes around the system and starts filling various bits, sort of like the whole entire charge cooler that we've fitted, getting to the top of these Ypipes, through the charge coolers and so on. So far I've put about 9 litres of mixed coolant in and I've pumped her up to about 15 psi. It's quite late at night here now, so I'm going to leave this overnight. This isn't a 100% leak-free little system. I think you'll get a tiny bit of air leakage from various places. So I'll expect a couple of pound drop on that overnight probably. But more importantly, I'll be looking at the floor for any leaks, any witness marks. 15 psi on there. The cap on this system is rated to 200 kPa, which is about 30 psi roughly. So, but that should be roughly your working pressure. Not Normally they're sort of 1.1 bar, 1.3 bar, something like that. So normal working pressure, yeah, just over a bar probably. Yeah, we'll see what it's like in the morning. We're on the next morning, left it overnight doing its pressure test, and we've lost a couple of pound, but there are no leaks, drips or puddles under the car anywhere, so I'm reasonably confident that we've got no leaks, and that'll just be a tiny bit of air escaping from around these connections or the gauge or what have you. Now for this little clip that I'm filming, I'm in a bit of a rush. So it's quite late at night here. I've just got home from work, ate my tea, and I had a parcel, which was the new Supercharger belt. So that's in down here, and then I fitted the last remaining piece of the puzzle, the Y piece of the air intake. So I'm desperate to give it a first start before it gets too late and I wake all the neighbourhood and I get lots of complaints. So expansion tank cap is off to allow air to escape. I'm just going to mix up a batch of coolant. The battery is on jump. I've just reconnected it all in the boot. I'll go over reconnecting and fitting that stuff later. But for now, I really want to hear it fire up again for the first time in ages. This is the first time I've had this key in my pocket for a long time. So, I'm just going to make up some coolant and we'll give it a go. We've got some coolant ready to top up and bleed as needed. Let's see if it fires into life. On a serious note, I'll be watching like a hawk for any leaks, and especially fuel leaks from the jump over rail that we've touched. But other than that, fingers crossed. So we've had the first start up. You might be able to hear everything just gently ticking as it cools down. I've got no coolant leaks that I can see. I've got no fuel leaks. I don't think there's any engine oil leaks. I did have some concern about the inner row of cam cover bolts because I had to drill some of them out. So I'm still going to keep an eye on the engine oil, keep an eye out for leaks on that. There is a little bit of a blow on the driver's side exhaust manifold to catalytic converter join there, that 2-bolt flange I think. So I'm going to just revisit that once it's cooled down. But overall I think it's gone pretty well. I'm quite happy with it. Sounds spot on. There's definitely more supercharger whine audible with the air intake and potentially with the fact it's overdriven. The new belt fits, everything runs true on the pulleys and what have you. Yeah, very pleased. Cool. As far as the intake goes, I built the sort of T-piece first, and what I mean by that is I put the aluminium joiner in this way into the T and this way into the T, clip those on. So then I had the T with the aluminium joiners, which I sort of slid in with the short hose pointing down, popped it onto the throttle body, twisted it round, clamped it, and then was able to clamp them two, and then that one. So that went on nice and easily. The supercharger belt is obviously the second one I've had from Paramount, and I'll get you the part number now. So interestingly, when it came in a Land Rover genuine parts bag with that number on. And when I googled this number, I haven't done loads of research on it, but it turns up as a Land Rover diesel auxiliary belt, but it also lists it for 3 litre and 5 litre supercharged engines. So that makes me think, well, is that just a standard 5 litre belt? Because off camera, between you and me, I tried fitting the original belt and that seemed like it was way too small. So I'm very confused about what belt that is and where it's come from, and I'll have to do a little bit more digging as to whether that's just a standard original belt or if it's a belt that was fitted between certain models and years. I've no idea what's gone on with that. So the air intake's on, the engine runs, we're leak free. I don't know what else to tell you other than that, other than I'm obviously not done because the bonnet's not on and the bumper's not on, and I might get the wheels refurbed. And there's a very small oil leak on the sump that was there to begin with, which I'm going to have to sort out. So this is a Google search for the part number that I came up with of LR011327, which is the belt Paramount have newly supplied me with. And it says it's 1,444mm long. And now that one fits really well, really nicely with the upper and lower pulleys on my early 2014 car. If I flick over to the Jaguar parts website, we can see that this is for the F-Type 2014 to 2024 supercharged 5 litre, and it lists 2 different belts for the supercharged 5 litre. There's a 1438mm belt and a 1412mm belt. And it depends on whether or not you've got this kind of tensioner or this kind of tensioner. Now this is the enhanced tensioner and this is the early Ford Motor Company style tensioner. So I think the 1412mm belt here is the part number that you would originally have with a Fomoco early tensioner. Then they later moved to the 1438 because there's a separate tab on the Jaguar website that looks like this, which shows only the 1438, and that page is titled Supercharged Gen 2 5 litre supercharged enhanced. Don't really know what the enhanced means or what the changes are, but maybe this is when they started to switch over to 4-wheel drive and the 575 level of power tuning, maybe. It's got the VIN numbers here that it's relevant to and from, but it only shows one type of tensioner, which has got these little sort of fan details on it here, and that is the difference really. So you've got 1438 or 1412 as your choices, as your standard belt, which explains why there's a difference in the Paramount performance ones. You'd like to think that they can just check your VIN out here and tell you which belt you'll have and which belt you'll need, but Maybe they just need to compile a little database on it or something. So that is an original Land Rover part, which is quite cool that they've managed to find that and use it. And that's 1444. So there you go, that explains the Supercharger discrepancy. So hopefully that little explanation was useful to you, and it irons out the Supercharger conundrum. I know a couple of people, when I searched for it, had a similar problem, but the answer wasn't there for it. So with that, I call this video finished. I'm dead chuffed with how it's gone, and the engine's running again smoothly. No leaks and what have you. I've got a couple more jobs to do on the car. The wheels are currently away for refurb. I sent a couple of braces off the bottom of the chassis as well for powder coating with them. And then I've got the bonnet and bumper to paint. There's a small oil leak on the sump which I'm aiming to sort out. And I'm going to change the auxiliary battery as well. So there's probably a couple more videos left in it, but this project is nearing the end. Not sure exactly what I'm going to move on to next, but I'll come up with something because I've always got something to do. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next couple of videos, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing, and that's it. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions or comments or whatever, please do get in touch. Bye bye.